So welcome everybody. I'm very happy to be back in Madrid for Greach, and thanks a lot to the organizers for inviting me. So I work for a small startup which focuses on APIs, web APIs, with a designer, a test tool, and a platform for hosting APIs, etc. So thanks to them, I'm here today. And a little information, with the Groovy in Action 2nd edition, we managed to get a special promo code. So if you use that promo code, so throughout the conference, CTW Greach, you'll get 39% off Groovy in Action, as well as all the other books from Manning. So if you want to take a chance at having any of their books and not just Groovy in Action, with a discount, that's the right time. So CTW Greach. So I'll do a quick history of the project. So back in 2003, two guys, Bob McWhirter and James Strachan, decided to create a new language. Wouldn't it be groovy if Java could do this or that? And somehow, by thinking about all the things these guys would have liked to have in Java back in the day, they decided to call the project Groovy because, yeah, it would be a groovy name, and the name somehow stuck. And that's actually the real story behind the name Groovy. And in August 2003, you don't have to read the details, but James Strachan announced the project and the inspiration from Python, Ruby, etc. But to create a language more dynamic, more concise, more expressive, etc. That would fit for Java developers basically, and not be as foreign as other languages would be for Java developers, but with the same level of productivity. And already in 2003, the very first, not even betas, it was really alpha quality, but the first versions of Groovy already had closures. They had the nice syntax for list maps, etc. There was already the JDK, all the Groovy methods enriching JDK classes, and it was purely dynamically typed. And it's pretty much still what Groovy is today. So we improved it, adding new features, new APIs, etc. But still, the spirit of Groovy was the same in 2003 as it is today. We continued on the path that was set by the initial creators. And in 2003, that's also when I actually joined the project. I had some spare cycles, and I had a need for a language I could embed in a project I was working on. And I started looking at Groovy, which was just out. And I noticed some problems in the code. I sent patches, and patches after patch, after patch, after patch. James Strachan told me, yeah, I'm fed up with all your patches. Let's make you a committer. And that's how I became a committer on the project, because I was contributing too much, basically. And in 2004, the Facebook, it looked like this, changed a little bit. That was the release of Java 5. In 2004, we provided a new parser using Antler. And in the history of Groovy, this was already the third parser. There was 2 hand-rolled parsers before. And even for the Antler parser, there was actually 2 rewrites before the current parser that we still have today, that we're working on overhauling as well. That's also in 2004 that Jochen Blackdrag joined the project. And I don't know if some of you remember the Bile blog by Hani Suleiman. And in 2004, he was already saying that Groovy would be a shipwreck. And, well, I think he got his forecast wrong, because we're still there, and in a quite big way. 2005, yeah, first flight of the A3880. The inception of GRAILS, yeah, that's already quite old now. 2006. Yeah. Yeah, and Java 6 as well in 2006, and Java 8 was not released in 2008. It's the year where we had the first full-time committer being paid to work on Groovy. That was Jochen, who was the lucky one, and that was sponsored by the guys who organized the No Fluff Just Stuff conference circuit in the US, and organizing the tons of other interesting conferences in the US. So that's how the project started, progressing even more rapidly when we had paid committers, obviously. 2007, that's the big year for Groovy with the 1.0, so it took us 4 years to get to releasing 1.0. But I think that any language needs at least 3 years. In retrospective, any language really needs about 3 to 4 years to be mature enough to be put in the hands of all the developers, because otherwise it's moving too much, it's not feature complete, it's too buggy, etc. So it's really the time that's really needed for a language to be ready enough. Not perfect, but at least ready enough. We created G21, so that was a company dedicated to Groovy and GRAILS. Graham Roche, Alex Katchman, and myself, we created that company. And that year was also the inception of gradle by Hans Doctor, and also the first Groovy and GRAILS Exchange conference in London. That was the very first conference dedicated to the Groovy ecosystem in 2007. The very beginnings of Spock, although nothing, so I'm mentioning the beginning dates, but it doesn't mean that it's the year where the project was first announced or released or anything like that, but really the inception. So I remember Peter Niederwieser showing me Spock. I'm not sure it was already called Spock on that time, when we were at the Devox conference. And it's only like 1 or 2 years after that he released the first version. But the very beginning of Spock was back then. In 2007, with Groovy 1.5, that was the big, let's say, Java 5 theme, where we added support for annotations, enum generics, etc. And also big aspect was the joint compiler. Very important step, so that people could really mix and match Groovy and Java sources together. I think that was a very, very important release for the project. And a few months ago, Cedric did some interesting stats on who are the most prolific and active committers, etc. And on that year, when Paul King joined, he quickly became the #1 committer. So big contributor to the Groovy projects, and a really great guy. 2008, the first GreatConf. Yeah. And SpringSource acquired G21, my company. So we joined SpringSource then. Griffin, where's Andres? Yeah, that was the year of Griffin. Do you remember EasyB? So it was a BDD test framework, but well, it's not remembered very much nowadays. Yeah, we had also a fork of Groovy with Groovy++, fully statically compiled, etc., by our colleague Alex. And that was really a nice playground for us for what became the static type checking and static compilation in Groovy later on. So we owe a lot to what also Alex did back in the day with Groovy++. Although it was slightly different from the path and approaches we took, but that was a very, very interesting experiment that fueled our discussions for what became the static aspects of Groovy later on. 2009, that's the day where the original founder said a special sentence that wasn't very friendly towards Groovy, so he became somehow a fan of Scala, and he said this famous quote, you know, I wouldn't have created Groovy if I had read the Scala book, so the book must have been great. This quote really harmed somehow the project for a little while. And it's a bit taken, it's been taken out of context, especially by the Scala fanboys, obviously. And it's exactly like if you imagine Gavin King back when he created Hibernate, if there had been JPA back then, would he have created Hibernate? No, because there was no need for that, because he would have had already something. So put out of context, his quote is really, you know, shitty. and funnily, so he started with Groovy, he moved to do some Scala, and then he moved to do some Kotlin, and then he came back to Groovy, actually. And he tweeted a few things like he's been playing with Jenkins, and the job DSL in Jenkins is Groovy-based. So he's been tweeting about that. Yeah, I forgot how much fun it is. It's so groovy, yeah. And this one, yeah, the job DSL again, Groovy, yeah, a great combination. Another one, he attended a conference on microservices, and he was seeing the cool bits of Groovy code in a certain presentation, and yeah, Groovy for the win. So it's funny. It's like, you know, the wheel turning, and you come back to do some Groovy. Okay, then Spring Source a year later was acquired by VMware. The Groovy ecosystem grows. We had Jeepers for all things parallel, asynchronous, etc. We had Jeb for functional testing, static code analysis with CodeNarc. Groovy 1.6, it's also an important release. So we made a lot of performance improvements, but that was the release where AST transformations came to life. And it's been a cornerstone in the life of Groovy, because we've continued in adding new transforms, new things related to transforms, etc. So I think it's one of the key releases of Groovy. In 1.7, the thing that that I was the most happy with was the integration of power asserts, which were actually coming from Spock, because they had been developed there. And I asked Peter, hey, could contribute that to Groovy? And he took power asserts and put that into Groovy. So for tests, that's really, really great, those very advanced asserts. In 2010, there was the Volcano, and that was during GreatConf US, and I was stuck for a week in Minneapolis because of the Volcano. So I remember that year very well. And yeah, some new things like Ratpack. So the Ratpack back in that day was quite different from the Ratpack that we have today, but that was the beginning of Ratpack. G-contracts for doing programming by contract. Another big year, 11. Yeah, Greach was born. A big year. Java 7 as well. Some new stuff like Vertex, GroovyFX. Yeah, I also. Well, I'm saying that for each release, like this was an important release, this one. So perhaps there's no release that wasn't important, but at least I'm going to highlight what I liked about a particular release. That was the command chain expressions. You know, the ability to, when you have chained method calls, to drop dots and parents, etc. I think that was a key feature that we brought there to make DSLs even easier to create, more readable, etc. That was really a nice addition to all the syntactical aspects which made Groovy great for domain-specific languages. And I also fondly remember implementing the JSON support, so that's a nice one. And Cedric joined the Groovy team. We moved to GitHub, the sources, instead of the Git on CODEHAUS. So we had moved off of SVN to use Git at CODEHAUS, but then to collaborate with people, that wasn't all that great, and the collaboration features of GitHub are really, really awesome, so we decided to move to GitHub. The boson of Higgs. Yeah, some more additions, like Netflix Zool, for instance. Whenever the 60 million customers of Netflix want to see a particular video, it's routed through some Groovy business logic. So it's probably the most web-scale deployment of Groovy in the wild for 60 million customers. Each time anyone, yourself, your grandmother, or whoever is watching a video on Netflix, that's going through some Groovy logic, so, which is quite nice. There was also GVM called SDK Man now. That was released. And GrooScript, where's Jorge? Is he there? Yep. Groovy script, it's there. GrooScript, sorry. Groovy script. That's the longer version of the name. Groovy 2, another very important release with the static type checking and static compilation. We also made Groovy much more modular and the initial support of invoke dynamic. So we not only improved the dynamic aspects and performance, but we also introduced that static flavor to Groovy in addition to the dynamic flavor. 2013, so there was a spin-off into a Pivotal. Some more stuff like lazy bones for templates, grain, etc. Some cool projects for static site generation. Groovy 2.1, type checking extensions, meta annotations. It's not something that's used very often, but that's quite elegant. Delegates 2, and yeah, that's about it. So it was more a refinement of Groovy 2, I would say, this release. Groovy 2.2, so we were already Java 8 friendly in terms of the functional interfaces that we have in Java 8. When you use lambdas, lambda can be coerced into a functional interface, and that's pretty much the same mechanism with our closure coercion mechanism. So it was Java lambda friendly already even before Java 8 was released. And you could use a Groovy closure wherever later on a lambda would be used. So that was quite handy. 2014, Java 8 was there at last. Elasticsearch decided to make Groovy the first, the preferred language for customizing Elasticsearch. So that was great. This little icon there, a bit blurry, that's gbench, the benchmarking tool for Groovy. Groovy 2.3 with traits, some more JDK 8 support, although we don't have the new syntax elements of JDK 8. At least we are compatible with JDK 8. Performance improvements for JSON and more refinements to AST transformations. And there's also the new markup template engine, which is a clever use of a mix of dynamic compilation and static compilation. So it's a very interesting component. Okay, and then, since then, what really happened? So you remember what happened last year. That was a pretty important year when Pivotal decided that they didn't want us anymore, so the Groovy and GRAILS teams were let go. And we were given till March 31st of last year to release Groovy 2.4 and GRAILS 3. So we had a big deadline to get those releases out. So, being fired, what else could possibly go wrong? Well, the CODEHAUS demise, because CODEHAUS was going to close its doors. And I mean, our infrastructure, well, except the code that we had moved to GitHub, but otherwise the infrastructure we had in place was going to be, at risk, and like all the Jira issues, all the mailing list, etc., all the stuff we had on the CODEHAUS infrastructure, well, we had to move that somewhere. So those two events combined, well, I'll come back to that. With those two events combined, you might be thinking, oh, okay, that's the end for Groovy or something like that. So what's going to be the impact for Groovy? And if you look at an indicator like the download numbers, which for me is usually quite meaningful in terms of whether a project is used or not. If you've got increasing downloads, that means the project is used more and more by your users. If the downloads decrease, obviously, you've got less usage. So you might be expecting, okay, so we had ever increasing download numbers, so what would be happening in 2015 in terms of downloads? So just on Maven Central, there was already 8 million downloads. And if you add the, so I don't have the full numbers because I lost a bit of stats from CODEHAUS. But if you add then Bintray on top of that, because we're on both Bintray and Maven Central, 4.7 billion from Bintray, that makes a total of 12.7 million downloads of Groovy, which is quite big compared to the previous year. And you might be wondering also what's happening this year. So I just did the stats two days ago on the first quarter, and we are already at 4.7 million. So if you multiply that by 4 quarters, we might be around like 18 million downloads, something like that. So even better than last year. So we'll see if the trend continues. So Groovy 2.4 that we released last year added the Android support. And for the Android support, there's a nice project which is Swiss Knife, dedicated to simplifying the development of Android applications with Groovy. So if you're developing an application on Android and want to use Groovy, be sure to check out Swiss Knife. Also to support that work, it was a great occasion for improving the bytecode we were generating to make it lighter and faster here and there, as well as some memory consumption reduction. We introduce at self type for traits, so it's not an AST transformation. It's really like a marker annotation where you can actually restrict to what a trait will be applied, basically. So if you want to say, okay, this is some kind of decorator for my component, I can say, okay, this is going to be added to components, but it's not going to be a trait that's going to be added to anything else. So if you have do something, the compiler knows that, okay, it might be a method from the component class, and indeed we have a do something method over there. So it improves the safety when you're applying traits and using static type checking or static compilation. Some ongoing GDK improvements. Lots of all the nice methods, each, collect, etc., are more based on iterators than before. So instead of always generating intermediary collections, we tend to use iterators so that we can do streaming loops through the data. Some refinement in terms of AST transformations. Essentially refinements. Groovish, if you use the Groovy shell, there was quite a bit of work on the Groovy shell. So if you want to have custom profiles and things like that. Plus better code completion as well. So it's quite nice if you use the shell. And what happened next? So we covered Groovy 2.4, the CODEHAUS demise, Pivotal leaving us on the ground. The musical chairs. So we were working for Pivotal. Where did we end up going? So some went to Gradle, me to Wrestlet. OCI took the GRAILS team, yeah, and Johan moved to Canoe. And we decided that, you know, for us, we value the community, the ecosystem, the guys, the users, etc., more than anything else. We don't want the project to be at the mercy of any commercial interest. We want our users to know that the project will be there for the long time. So we decided to join the Apache community, the Apache Software Foundation, and sending that message to the community that the project was independent and here to stay, and that we really valued the community above everything. So that's why we moved to the Apache Foundation. We went through the Apache Incubator. You have to prove that you can be a successful open source project through the Apache Incubator. So that was in March, a year ago. We have some initial mentors who followed us and helped us go through the incubation process, the initial committers, and we added some committers, which were actually some of them committers before that we joined us, who joined us back on the project, and some new ones like Sheil or John, who have been doing a great job lately on the project. So for the infrastructure, we had to move everything, the mailing list, Jira issues, etc., and also we couldn't continue using our Groovy repository on GitHub, and the way it works at Apache is the sources are on Apache's own Git repository, but they provide a mirror on GitHub. But the fact that it's a new repository made that led us to losing all our stars. So we had, I don't remember how many stars we had on GitHub on our old repository, but we lost quite a bit in the process. So go to the GitHub repository now, the Apache mirror, and please be sure to add your star to get back into having as many stars as before. And we're having some discussions with the Groovy Foundation, the Apache Foundation, sorry, about the website, because to follow the Apache rules and so on, ideally the project should be hosted at groovy.apache.org instead of our own website and domain name. But we might have a chance to split things. Some things could be on Groovy Lang, some things on Groovy Apache org, etc. So it's still something that needs to be worked on. And the other aspect, infrastructure-wise, is also our release process, how we make releases. We still have, we lost quite a bit when moving to Apache in terms of release automation, continuous delivery, etc. And we're still in the process of improving that to make things as automatic and transparent as it was before. And in, when was that, November, last November, we graduated from the incubator and became a top-level project at Apache. So now, as Ivan or Alberto were saying earlier, you can call Groovy Apache Groovy. And we also made a release after becoming a top-level project. Our first release was 2.4.6, released last February. And also, I think the main driver is probably the move to the Apache Foundation and all the buzz around Groovy because of what happened to the project. But it also meant that since the beginning of the year, we're now in the TIOB index, in the top 20 languages of the index. So we are ranging between the 17th and 20th rank. But it's quite nice. So don't read too much into that, because for me, those kind of index stuff, it's not very meaningful. They rank languages according to Google search queries, etc. So it's not really a study among 1 million developers and say, hey, what are you using? What language do you use, etc. So it's don't read too much into that. To choose a language, don't just pick up the first language in the list. It would be totally stupid. Use the right tool for the job. Okay, and we covered 2.4, but since then, although we are not yet at 2.5, but we're thinking about releasing a first beta of Groovy 2.5, I'd like to highlight some of the features which were little nuggets which were released since around Groovy 2.4.4, so 2.4.5, 2.4.6, and what's also coming into 5. So there was some work on the performance of the compiler with a new ASM class reader instead of relying on the class loading, so and its side effects. So it's a nice performance improvement for the compiler. Canonical became a meta notation. Yeah, I'll go through some of these with some code samples. So canonical, just like immutable, but canonical is for mutable data basically, became meta annotation. So we have this ability to create annotations which regroup other annotations or ST transformations and are actually replaced by the compiler at compile time with the real annotation. So it's really a meta annotation, which is a kind of synonym for several other annotations or transformations. And before, canonical is a mix of tuple constructor equals an hash code, toString, and that's about it. But it was a custom transformation and not really bundling those three transforms together. But now it's really the case, and canonical is actually a meta annotation rather than being something on its own with duplicated code compared to what's in, let's say, equals and hash code, what was kind of duplicated in canonical. So now it's not the case anymore, and which means that it also opens when you create a meta annotation, if, let's say, the include names parameter is from the toString transformation, you can use it there in at canonical if it's not a parameter of at canonical. So it kind of distributes that to the right transformation. And that's why there are some things before, if you wanted to customize add toString, you had to add toString in addition and configure add toString independently of add canonical. So it's a little improvement. So it won't change much when you use add canonical, but for us that's much cleaner in terms of how we implement that. The annotation collector, which is what is being used by meta annotations, has also been enhanced, and don't read the details, doesn't really matter. But the way, let's say you've got several annotation parameters which may be clashing because they share the same name or things like that. So you've got more control on how the meta annotation collector is actually working. The map constructor transform, so it's a new thing. You can have pre and post treatments basically when you use the map constructor. So this is the example above. If you want to treat the input that you pass as with the map constructor, you can do that with pre and post closures. So we just use closures for defining what we want to do with the attributes. On time, yeah, 81 minutes. Properties, AST transforms. When you were, so for example, if you use autoclone and you want to say, I want to exclude this or that property, you would get now you get actually a compilation error if you make typos in the properties that you include. So you've got better error reporting, basically. The tuple constructors, I don't think many people know about how it's actually working, because people just think that, okay, there's a constructor with first, last, and age. But actually, we also create the other intermediary constructors by dropping the last argument each time. So there's also first string, first last, sorry, also first, and also nothing. And now there's a parameter that you can pass to say, I'm not sure it's defaults true, it might be defaults false, I'm not sure, I'll have to double check, which only generates the big one with all the properties and not just all the variant of constructors. Immutable wasn't working across class hierarchies, so here our immutable athlete was extending person, and you couldn't do that with add immutable, so it had to be the base class, so it's a nice improvement. Plus, again, some GDK things like wherever we are manipulating collections, maps, etc., we try to keep the same kind of collection, so that if you used a linked hash map or an array list or whatever, we're trying to keep always the same kind of collection and not create always array lists or things like that. So it's much better now. Well, so to conclude, although the initial core team who was working for a Pivotal is not full-time anymore on Groovy, we are still grateful that there was a company like SpringSource, then VMware, then Pivotal, which sponsored us to work full-time on the project. I mean, the project wouldn't be where it is today without the support of such companies. So even if even today, I'm still a bit, if not angry, perhaps it's too strong, but still a bit bitter about what happened, because I still think that we could have done even more great things under the Pivotal banner. But well, we're still grateful for all this time, and also it's in French, but that's the I'm not sure what it's called in English, the rabbit and the tortoise or something like that. Meaning that sometimes also the fact when you have full-time contributors and part-time contributors, sometimes it's difficult to work at the same pace, and the ones who are not full-time usually struggle to follow the ones which are full-time, etc. So sometimes it creates somewhat of a odd playing field, and so it has some advantages because you can develop certain features faster or spend more time on on a big feature. Doing a very big feature when you're just part-time, it's really, really difficult. So all our ideas of a new mob, of Java 8 features, etc., which require lots of time and attention, etc., it's even harder now to implement those things since we're not full-time on the project anymore. But we'll get there, but perhaps a little bit slower. And as usual as well, the hardest part when you develop open source software is actually to get people to participate and contribute to the projects. So it's an invitation that if you have some time, we'd be happy to receive your contributions. So I know among you, lots provides feedback on the mailing list or create bug reports. Yeah, requests for bugs. No, that's not it. Feature requests. Perhaps you request bugs, but yeah, that would be weird. So we're always happy to get new contributors and so on. And guys like, for example, Shiel, recently we managed to get into the static compilation parts that were developed by Cedric, etc. That's not an easy path, to go through some advanced features like that. So it's quite tricky, but it's really rewarding. And frankly, I'd say professionally speaking, at a career level, I'm so grateful I had the chance to work with so many great minds, thanks to the Groovy project, because I've got the feeling that it really helped me improve my coding abilities, etc. And without that open source project, well, obviously I wouldn't be there today in front of you. So it's really a great opportunity, a great chance to work on open source. And that's it. Thanks a lot for your attention. And we've got 5 minutes for questions. Yeah, good. Perfect. So do you have any questions?
Nobody?
I was just wondering, for the adaptation,
For the annotations parameters, what do you do if you have two annotations when you aggregate them that have the same names?
With the same name. So what's the default? I think there's one which takes precedence over the other.
And if you want to specify a value for each.
Yeah. So with the annotation collector, you can actually customize it. So you've got a chance to say when you define the meta annotation, you've got a chance to say, okay, this is how I want to handle those cases. And then you've got more control now, default behavior, let's say, for those kind of cases. And you're also able to define some logic to say, okay, dispatch this to that, etc. For instance, I used to give an example where, let's say you've got a @max annotation which takes a value, an @min which takes value, the default value parameter. That's the same value. And then I want to create a range min-max, basically, @range. And then I created a specific annotation collector that takes the value of this one, the value of this other one, and etc. So
nice. And how do you specify the collector strategy? Is it inside the sources, or is it parameter that you give to the compiler?
It's it's how you define the meta annotation. So you create a new annotation, @interface, blah blah blah, and that's where you can define the details how you want this to be handled. Yeah, but it's a quite rarely used feature actually, meta annotations, in my experience. But it's quite handy, especially when you work on a project and like your domain classes always have those 3 or 4 annotations. I don't know, @transactional, @whatever, and often you've got the same set everywhere. And that's a good chance to reduce the annotation-driven development. There are some frameworks like Spring, tons of annotations. You sometimes have seen examples of Spring or Spring Boot where you actually it's not really like that in the real life, but for samples at conferences, etc. In talks, you see like 10 annotations, but just 2 lines of business code. Come on, that's weird sometimes. Yeah, the new XML, exactly. Any other question? Yogi.
There are some plans for Java 9.
Yeah. I think the best one for that question would be Cedric. There's going to be quite some work to ensure that it works fine on JDK 9, and especially all those modules, the rules with modules, etc. It's going to be a bit painful for us. Although I think it evolved a little bit with the because one of the problems we had was a module. So you couldn't have the same package in 2 different modules. And for us, it's a bit painful because we have our own Groovy modules, our own jars. We sometimes have classes which are actually in 2 different packages, in the same package, sorry, but in 2 different modules. And this is a bit tricky. So it might also mean that we'll introduce some breaking changes, like moving a class in a certain package or in another package, etc., because we will have to comply with the new rules imposed by the module system of JDK 9. So it's, we're looking closely at what's going on, but JDK 9 and the module system is still evolving, so it's still a bit of a moving target. But we'll have to support it at some point anyway. So it's not an option not to support it. Yeah.
The Groovy streams that you mentioned quite early on, are they as in Java Stream API?
No. So that's really, so all our find all, collect, each, etc. It's not using the Java streams from JDK 8. So it's our own stuff. But the fact that you can use Groovy closures wherever Lambda expressions are used makes that you can actually use the Java streams instead of what Groovy provides. So you can combine the benefits of Groovy closures plus the Java 8 streams. But since those collect, each, etc., they have been there since 2003 or later, we still have to support them, and we don't want to ditch what we had already. So we'll have to support both. Okay?
Okay, thank you, Guillaume.
Thanks a lot.
Good night.